If you enjoy this episode, please leave a rating and a comment or get in touch at podcasts@freedom.to. Welcome to Freedom Matters, where we explore the intersection of technology, productivity, and digital well-being. I'm your host, Georgie Powell. This week, I'm in conversation with Kevin Roose. Kevin is an award-winning technology columnist for the New York Times and the New York Times best-selling author of 3 books, Futureproof, Young Money, and The Unlikely Disciple. He is host of Rabbit Hole, a New York Times-produced podcast about internet culture, and a regular guest on The Daily, as well as other leading TV and radio shows. He writes and speaks regularly on many topics, including automation and AI, social media, disinformation and cybersecurity, and digital wellness. We found so much of what Kevin had to say to be interesting, and so we've broken from our usual 3-question, 20-minute format to share this extended episode, and we hope you like it. We'll be discussing how Kevin is personally taking back control with tech, his latest book, Futureproof, why he wrote it and some of its recommendations, as well as just why he defines himself as a sub-optimist when it comes to technology. Okay, here we go. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today on Freedom Matters. We are so glad to have you here. It really is a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
To kick off, I wanted to understand better Kevin's own relationship with tech. In his book, he describes himself as a sub-optimist. What exactly is this?
Yeah, so I often get asked whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I didn't really have an answer for a long time because I am pretty optimistic about the technology. I think that things like AI and machine learning can improve lives in many ways. It can make health diagnoses more accurate. It can help make energy use more efficient. It can tell us new and interesting things to watch on social media or on Netflix. The technology can be really good, but it doesn't always improve our lives. And I am much less optimistic about the people and the decision makers who are implementing a lot of this technology, what their motives are, what their guardrails are, and what they're doing with the technology. And so I came up with this word sub-optimism. I call myself a sub-optimist because I am trying to be as optimistic as possible. I am optimistic by nature, and I want to be an optimist about AI and automation. And right now, the humans are just getting in the way.
And so, from a personal perspective, how does Kevin manage his relationship with tech on a daily basis?
My relationship to technology is tortured. I am a technology columnist. I write about technology for a living. I am also a human being who struggles, like every human being I know, with overuse of certain technologies, with focus and distraction. So I have been a loyal Freedom user for many years because it is the only way I can actually write. I've tried everything over the years. Physically, I have a lockbox that I lock my phone inside, but I give the key to my wife and I say, don't give me this key until I've written 1,200 words. I have shut down my Wi-Fi. I have tried all kinds of crazy productivity hacks just to sort of be able to do the work of sitting down and writing books and articles and other things.
A few years ago, Kevin completed a digital detox with support of former podcast guest Catherine Price. The experience led him to more critically assess not only how much time he was spending on screens, but how they were influencing his behaviour. He set out on a journey to build more friction back into his life.
So this is something I have battled with a lot, is not just how much I'm using my phone and various other screens. It's how I'm using them and how much power I am giving over to them. I think the quality of screen time and what we're actually doing on the screens matters a lot more than just the raw time. And I found that actually when I was more conscious of my phone use, I was more deliberate about making sure that I was using my phone and not the other way around.
And then it wasn't necessarily leading you down a decision pathway that you hadn't chosen to go on.
Yeah, I think this is one of the least explored and most underrated effects of technology and especially of these supercomputers we carry around in our pockets that are loaded with software on which billions of dollars has been spent to integrate artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms to commandeer our attention. We are really at the mercy of these machines in many ways. They tell us what to watch, what to listen to. We let, Gmail write our emails for us. So I think one of the things that I've been trying to do, especially over the past year during the pandemic, is just to pull back some of those decisions from the machines in my life. Not because I like the idea of making my own playlists or, there's definitely a trade-off for convenience, but I find it's really important to keep some of those decisions to myself because I want them to reflect what I actually prefer and value. I want my playlists to be things that I enjoy and not just things that I put on because an algorithm told me I would like them.
We shifted track. It was time to talk more about Futureproof. I asked Kevin for an overview of his new book and what motivated him to write it.
Sure. So I wrote this book because I was concerned about the potential for AI and automation to disrupt our lives and my life in particular. I mean, I'm a journalist. I work at a newspaper, a job that existed hundreds of years ago and is not, immune to technological disruption by any means. So I was curious about two things, and the book is sort of structured in two parts. The first part is really the diagnosis. It's what is actually happening with AI and automation right now, not what is going to happen in the future, not what does sci-fi tell us is going to happen 50 years from now, but what is actually happening in the world today. How are these machines shaping our lives? And what myths have we absorbed about them that may not be true, that may not hold up? And then the second half of the book is really the prescription. If you think of the first half as the diagnosis. So the second half, which are these 9 rules, is my attempt to say, this is not just some natural phenomenon that happens to us. Technological change isn't this force that we have no control over that just sweeps over us and changes our lives. We actually are still in control. And so what are the 9 things that you as a person can do to make yourself less replaceable, to make yourself less susceptible to automation, to reclaim control over your devices and your environment? What are the things that people need to know going into this new era of machine influence?
Kevin's 9 rules, perhaps our 9 lives in defence of automation, cover broadly 2 areas. Firstly, how to position yourself for the future of work, and secondly, how to better manage your personal relationship with technology. With respect to work, Kevin argues optimistically, you might say, that some jobs, those which are social, scarce or surprising, are least likely to become replaced by machines. I asked him to explain this further.
So this rule, be surprising, social, and scarce, came out of a bunch of conversations I had with AI scientists and developers, people who work on automated systems, who are very close to the cutting edge. And I basically went to them and asked, what is left for us? What can humans do that is not likely to be automated in the near future and that will be safer places to be career-wise for us? And they told me essentially that these jobs fell into 3 categories. The first is surprising. So AI, automated systems, computers in general, they like rules. They like regular environments, static environments, places where you can practice something a million times, get slightly better at it each time. This is why, for example, AI is very good at playing chess. Chess is like a bounded environment. The rules are always the same. You can predict what the rules are going to be each time you play. But AI is not very good at handling surprises. It's not very good at handling new information, novel situations, unexpected chaos, or changes to the rules. So that's the kind of job that is more protected, would be things like EMTs or teachers of young children, people whose jobs involve handling the unexpected. That is something that is much harder for technology to do now. The second category is what I call social jobs, which are jobs that basically are not about producing things or doing things for people. They're about making people feel certain ways. So that would be your therapists, your clergy, your teachers, some of your healthcare workers, people whose jobs involve producing feelings and experiences rather than just objects. When you go to a bar, you're not really going for just somebody to pour you a drink. You're going because you want a human connection, you want a human experience. And I think that's something that is going to be very hard for machines to do. And then the third category is what I call scarce jobs. These are jobs that require sort of rare skills, rare circumstances, high stakes situations, things that are basically too important to outsource to machines. So an example of this is in the States, when you call 911 to report an emergency, you get a human on the other end of the line. And it's not because we can't automate that job. We have the technology to do it. We've just sort of decided as a society that there are some things that are too important to be handed over to machines. And so those kinds of jobs are not technically hard to automate, but they are societally hard to automate because we've decided that people should be in the driver's seat.
On the other hand, there are other jobs which we have already decided are far too important to leave to human error and are already being automated. Take surgery, for example. For other roles, surely there's an economic tipping point where the economic value of automation supersedes the social or societal value. I pressed Kevin on this further.
Well, it's an interesting example you chose in customer service, because that is an industry that is actually in some ways de-automating. There are a lot of companies that went to an automated phone system sometime in the 90s, and their customer satisfaction scores went down because people hated the automated machines. They just wanted to talk to a human. And so they've actually been bringing in more humans to replace the automated phone trees. There's been some really good research about what happens when that shift takes place, and it actually turns out to be much better for business to have humans doing those jobs rather than fully automated systems. Another example of an industry that I think thought that this would be easier than it turned out to be is something like social media content moderation. Companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, they all thought that algorithms could automatically detect hate speech, could detect violent threats, could detect graphic imagery and things like that. So they had very few humans involved in that process. They automated essentially the entire, what we used to call like the editorial function of choosing which things are appropriate and not. But then it turns out that machines aren't very good at that yet. And that a lot of things were slipping through the cracks. And so they actually brought in, thousands more humans in Facebook's case to sift through content and figure out, okay, this person is clearly joking, but this person is clearly not joking. This should stay up. This should come down. And so that's also an industry where it was more profitable to do it with machines until it wasn't, until it was too risky to have those things slipping through the cracks.
The other part of Kevin's 9 rules reflect on our own relationship with technology and how to regain control. For him, much of this is about reintroducing friction into his life, choosing a harder path to stay in control of our own decision-making. But is this really what so many of us, conditioned as we are to the ease that technology brings, something that we're likely to opt for?
I think that people choose harder ways to do things all the time. At Machu Picchu, there's a train that can take you to the top. But millions of people a year still hike. Why? It's much slower. It's much less efficient. There's much more friction. But they choose to do it because they want that experience. That's a dumb example, but people choose labor-intensive options over convenience all the time in many areas of life. And so I think that when it comes to technology, we're starting to see that happen too. People are choosing efficiency and productivity in some areas, but in other areas, they're not. The analogy I like to use for this is the slow food movement. Like we had this era of incredible technological advancement in fast food, in industrial production of hamburgers and fries. Those are essentially technology products masquerading as food. And we had this movement and it became really profitable, and there were huge multi-billion-dollar businesses built on that technology. But then we also have had this slow food movement, this farm-to-table movement, this sort of more craftsman-like artisanal production. And I think we will see that in all areas of the economy. We're already starting to see that in information. People are now paying for news in a way that they didn't 10 years ago. They're willing to pay for quality rather than just reading, whatever comes across their Facebook feed. And so I think that's a trend that we're starting to see more and more of in my industry, certainly, but I think probably in every industry. There's going to be, or there already is, this kind of artisanal approach that is gaining popularity.
Yeah, and I just wonder, can that reach every sector of society, or actually is this going to lead to a division among society of those who have the resources to be able to opt into decisions and platforms like that versus those that aren't able to?
With something like news, I do worry that we're moving into a world in which people with resources have the ability to get true, factual, reliable information, and everyone else is sort of at the mercy of the algorithms. And I don't know what to do about that. But I would rather have both be available than only one of those things.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about that either. And it's worrying. It's coming up increasingly, actually, in every conversation that we have as kind of truth and the search for truth really being at the heart of all our relationship with technology.
Just to make one more point on that, I think this is coming up a lot with screen time too. I mean, one of the chapters I wrote for the book that got cut, that didn't actually make it in, was about the difference between the schools and the educational institutions that serve elite, wealthy populations in the Bay Area versus the ones that serve less elite, less wealthy populations. And actually, the difference is that all the high-end preschools in the Bay Area are all, Waldorf schools where they have no screens and no technology, and the kids play with wooden blocks. Yeah. And then you can go down the street to a school in a poorer area, and they'll have tons of laptops and coding competitions. And it's a really sort of reversal of what we typically think of as the digital divide, which is that rich people have access to more technology. It's actually kind of reversing itself out here, at least, where the sort of wealthier you are, the more status you have, the less likely you are to be constantly surrounded by technology.
For sure. And I think you made that really interesting observation of why we're pushing everyone into STEM. What we should be doing is pushing everyone into building their machine age humanities, I think you call them. And I was going to ask you this question next. Can you talk a bit more about that? Because for me, I think that was one of the biggest, most powerful recommendations in your book.
Yeah, so I get asked this question all the time by people. It's like, okay, you say AI and automation are coming. You say that they're already here. You say that it's going to transform the economy. I'm a high school student, or I have a kid who's in high school. What should they study? And I think we know now that the answer is not that they should all be coders and engineers. And those are valuable skills, but they're certainly not immune to automation. And so the skills that are most in demand now are things like creativity and empathy and leadership, and the skills that are sort of don't come out of formal education nearly as much. And so I've started talking about what I call machine age humanities. They're not the classic humanities. It's not reading Socrates. It's not, it's not,
well, it
it's
could
not,
be
just
in your rest time.
It could be. Certainly it could be, but it's not enough just to read a lot of books, just as it's not enough to learn how to write Python or JavaScript. What we really need are these kind of skills that will help us navigate technology and remain in control of our lives. So it's a chapter of the book that I think is trying to start a conversation rather than have a complete conversation. But I do think we need to be at all levels of education and thinking about what are the skills that can help people succeed in this automated economy that we're moving to, because I think that's quite different from what a lot of students, especially in the older grades, are being taught.
One of the machine age humanities that Kevin advocates is resting. I wanted to hear more.
Yeah, resting is really important. I'm going to sound like Gwyneth Paltrow or something. We know that in an economy that is more oriented around producing ideas and experience and human connection than it is about producing goods and services, that it's important that people are fully present and fully themselves. And we know that lack of sleep impairs emotional intelligence and impairs communication, impairs our ability to relate to other people. So if we're just like hustle culture zombies running around all the time, trying to squeeze more into our days, we might get more done, but we're missing the high value things that we could be doing. And so I advocate for people to be well rested, not as just a wellness thing, but as a real strategic thing. You don't see people who are operating on, very little sleep, like being sort of visionary geniuses a lot. There's some, but
I think Elon Musk is like the exception, isn't he?
Well, he's the exception to a lot of things, but I think he has sort of inspired this cult of people, especially in tech, who just never sleep. And in certain industries, that might not be a problem. But certainly in my industry, I find that I have better ideas the more well-rested I am, and probably am a more valuable employee.
In his book, Kevin talks a lot about the impact of automation on the future of work and how the pandemic has accelerated that process. I was interested to hear from him, though. How has it affected our personal relationship with machines? He showed concern that those all-important softer skills of empathy, communication, leadership were under threat.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, but my screen time has gone up in the past year. I suspect if you took a look at all of our screen times, they would probably have moved up in the past year. And some of that has been good. Kids could go to school on Zoom rather than having to risk getting sick in the classroom. It's good that people have been able to work remotely rather than going into offices where they might infect other people. So I'm not trying to say that all of this screen time is bad, but it certainly has been different. And I think that for me, at least, I've found a lot of my human skills have atrophied. Like I'm like really not that good at having social interactions now. I've had to sort of relearn how to do that as I've been vaccinated and going back out into the world. And so I think these softer skills, these skills of empathy and communication and leadership and courage and things like that, I think that stuff is just hard to do from behind a screen. You really need to be face-to-face with people. You really need to be talking with people. I think that remote work has many good things about it, but one of the bad things is that it's harder to display these softer, more human skills if you're not physically in a workplace.
Another trend that's evident to me is how working from home has eroded our work-life boundaries and led many people to work more than they ever intended. I asked Kevin, did he think it would be possible to turn this trend around?
Well, I think people are already starting to turn them around. I mean, especially if you look at the sort of upper echelons of the industry I cover, tech. For every Elon Musk, there are 10 CEOs who go on 10-day meditation retreats or who don't answer email on the weekend. There is this sort of culture of rest and recharging and self-care that is sort of percolating throughout the economy right now. And some of that is lip service and some of that is real. But I think people recognize that burnout is a real issue, not just health-wise, but like for businesses. People are quitting. They're having to pay them more to retain them. People are really burnt out. They're really tired. They've been through a year of anxiety and dread and making adjustments to their life to not get COVID. One of my colleagues wrote a piece the other day calling for a national week off, just like everyone gets the week off. And I think that's brilliant because how much more productive would we all be if we were not working 18 hours a day? How much happier would we be? How much more time would we have to spend with family? So I think that conversation is starting, and I don't think it actually requires a huge sea change. I think we're already doing it on our own because what we've been doing is so unsustainable.
So that's great. That fills me with hope on the individual level. What about at the corporate level? You said you've got sub-optimism because you think AI can be great, but unfortunately it's being managed at the moment by perhaps humans that have the wrong intentions. How do we change that journey?
I mean, I think workers have to recognize that this is happening to them and speak up about it. One of the trends I've been tracking in the tech industry these days and in the AI sector specifically is what I call bossware, which is basically software that is designed to surveil remote workers. So a lot of companies, they're telling their people, you have to install this software if you want to work remotely, and it's going to track all your keystrokes, and it's going to use AI to determine whether you're paying attention during the video call or not, and it's going to track your time and your task completion rate. And this has been true at places like Amazon warehouses forever, that people have been tracked in this way. But now it's, white collar employees who are working from home. And I think that's really destructive. I mean, that's an example of a really bad use of really good technology. That is not making anyone's job better. It's not making anyone happier. It's not even making people more productive. It's just purely a control thing. If you work at a company that is doing that, you really need to push back on that, because that is how change happens. We're starting to see that actually. There have been some stories about Amazon delivery drivers using these GPS jammers. There are these little devices you can plug into the cigarette lighter in your car to like throw off the GPS so that you can like just tell your boss, oh, I don't know, the system malfunctioned and I don't know what happened during that hour that I wasn't on the grid. So we're starting to see some sort of rebellion like that. But I think it's a conversation that's overdue. We need to let people work. Companies need to trust the people they hire. And if they can't trust them not to play video games all day while they're supposed to be working, then maybe they shouldn't have hired them in the first place.
In his book, Kevin talks about how the move to automation is driven by capitalism. But there are also case studies from the social sector where AI is being deployed not always well. For example, in prison sentencing, where bias is marginalising some repeat offenders. I asked Kevin, why do these cases prevail in the public sector?
Well, in some cases, I think it is a cost thing. I mean, these agencies, these court systems, these prison systems, they have budgets, and if they can spend a little bit of money to automate a process that previously took a lot of humans, that's better for them. There's a seed of truth here, which is that a lot of humans are very biased. We talk a lot about AI bias, but humans are actually quite biased too. And in something like the justice system, if we could train an algorithm perfectly to mete out sentences based on severity of whatever crime occurred, theoretically, that could be better than our current system, which is just like human judges making decisions based on, how they're feeling that day. There's that famous study about how judges who had just returned from lunch were much more lenient than judges right before they went to lunch. So we have these imperfect decision-making machines in our heads running all the time. And theoretically, you could do better using AI to make those kinds of decisions. The problem is that the technology is not perfect. And in many cases, it's just as biased, if not more biased, than the humans. It's being trained on unrepresentative data and things like that. So I think until those systems are good enough to replace us, I think we need to keep humans in the loop to oversee and manage the systems so that we don't have these things going haywire and cutting people off from their benefits mistakenly or assigning them sentences that are too long. There's a lot that can go wrong in these systems. And
is that a regulatory responsibility then?
Sure. I think that's the level at which it can be most effectively contained. And we're already starting to see a little bit of this. I mean, some of these sentencing algorithms have been sort of pushed back on by regulators. There have been enough mistakes with these that I think regulators are already scrutinizing them, but I think that's an important piece of it.
But what about across the board? Is regulation going to rein in AI, or is Kevin hoping that corporate leadership will just decide to keep the humans?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of faith in timely regulation just because this stuff is moving so fast. And we don't even have regulation for social media right now. And that's almost 20 years old at this point. Yeah. So how long is it going to take us to get regulation for machine learning and neural networks and transformer algorithms and all these things that are basically brand new in the grand sweep of history. So I think a lot of it's going to have to be sort of self-regulation, but also regulation in the form of pressure from the public, pressure from customers, pressure from workers. One of the things that can help is for workers to speak up about this stuff, even if they're not formally organized into a union. There's a lot they can do.
Yeah, and it comes back to this transparency argument as well, doesn't it? A bit like with your food example of sort of tracing the food chain, tracing what the product or the service you're being given, how it's actually being given to you, and what decisions have been made along the way by machines or humans. And then also what decisions have already been made for you. It would be so nice to know, because sometimes, to your point, we're trying to take back that decision making, but often we don't even know which decisions have been made.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've been trying to do in my reporting for the last few years about things like YouTube, is just telling people this sidebar, this recommendations thing on your homepage that you think is just giving you interesting video recommendations, that is the product of billions of dollars of research and development. Yeah. The world's top AI scientists have spent years refining that to know you, to structure your choices in a way that's going to make you spend more time on YouTube to get as much attention of yours as it possibly can. And so I think just helping people understand this system that's all around us every day, nudging us and influencing us. I think that's really important.
And I guess that leads on to my final question, the final point, which was the other thing I really love was arm the rebels. And I think this comes back to the kind of the sub-optimism within you is we can make a better future, but we need lots of voices challenging and pushing us all in the right direction. Perhaps you could just finish by telling us a bit about that recommendation and what you really hope from that.
Yeah, this was my attempt to end on a hopeful note because I am ultimately quite hopeful about how all of this technology is going to play out. I think it requires not only regulators, not only people, customers speaking up or getting angry on Twitter or whatever. I think there's also a real role for ethical technologists, for people inside the industry making products, developing products, implementing products who are on the side of the human. And so that's what I call arming the rebels, is just supporting people in these industries, in AI, in social media, in technology broadly, who are fighting to make these systems fairer and more equitable and more humanitarian in the sort of literal sense, more oriented to serving the needs of humans rather than controlling and manipulating them.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously good journalism is going to help with that too, right? Just trying to shine a light on what's really happening with the technology that we use every day. Kevin, you've been a fantastic guest today. Thank you so much for joining us. I really recommend the book. I really enjoyed reading it and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat.
Take care. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Freedom Matters. If you like what you hear, then subscribe on your favourite platform. And until next time, we wish you happy, healthy, and productive days.